So this is what typically what people think of when they hear the word business plan, and I like to call this the BFD, the big formal document, 100 to 200 page opus that has been perfected over 6 months to a year. It's full of lots of pictures, Excel spreadsheets, you name it. And this was the way, this was the method of putting together business plans for the last 50 years, and it still seems to be the method in a lot of quarters. And the problem with it, and I've written these, actually I was pulling off the shelf business plan I wrote 18 years ago when I was in business school, and it's literally almost an inch thick, and we wrote it over a 6-month period. It was in an entrepreneurial commerce program, and if you can believe it, it was for an ice cream shop in Victoria, BC. So simple business. We had a business plan, I think it was about 125 pages. So it was a lot of work. And what I'm going to talk about today is to avoid that, getting into that that effort of writing that BFD. The problem with the BFD is if you have an idea, the conventional wisdom is the first thing you need to do is sit down in front of your computer and start writing that business plan, and that can take a lot of time. I was reading an article, I'm going to share it with you in a moment, that some people spend 6 months to a year writing a business plan, and that time could be better spent going out and talking to customers, getting customers, rather than writing that business plan, which is often written in what I call the vacuum, where you're basically writing a bunch of assumptions and thinking that's the business, and you're going to enter the market, and the market will follow your plan exactly, which is usually not the case. So the BFDs, where do they go? Venture capitalists have a term called the pile, and that's the pile. It's those thick documents end up on the corner of their desk, and they have the best intentions to read it while they're on the plane, but they never get to it. If you've ever read the 50 to 100 page business plan, it's a lot of work to get through and to really understand what the person's doing, and oftentimes they aren't written the best. Now the opposite argument of doing the BFD, the 100 pages of untested assumptions, is to just wing it. Well, if planning is a waste of time, let's just not plan, let's just get out there. And obviously that's not the best option either. We're trying to find a midpoint where we're balancing planning with action, because planning is very important. And what we're talking about today is business planning is real important. It's just the format of what that business plan looks like. And the idea here is to build a really rigorous business plan and not waste resources on that business plan and spend that time and energy in other areas that are more beneficial to getting your business off the ground, because that's the key. So we'll do a little history lecture here on the history of the business plan. So really the business plan, it comes out of the corporate world, Fortune 500. General Motors under Alfred Sloan started writing business plans for the various units, Cadillac, Chevrolet, et cetera, and every year the teams would put together their marketing plan, their financial plan, operational plan, and that format worked its way down throughout the entire economy. And it worked its way down into the small business, and if you go on Amazon or you go to the library and you look at books on business planning, and I think there were 19,000 books if you search business planning on Amazon. So there's 19,000. It's a cottage industry. A lot of consultants make a lot of money off the BFDs. But what they did was translate the idea of writing these huge planning documents for multi-billion-dollar corporations for all kinds of businesses. Whether it's the ice cream shop that I wrote, our team, we wrote a 125-page business plan for an ice cream shop. Geez, I bet you, most Fortune 500s don't have a business plan that's that long. So that was the way things were done. In the 80s and 90s, venture capital really took off, and the pitches, I remember in the late 90s, it was all about writing the business plan when I was in business school. we were taught how to do the standard traditional BFD format, and that's what you presented to an investor. You worked really hard on that, and that's what the venture capitalists would look at. And if you can remember, if some of you were involved in some of these in the 80s and 90s, the college business plan competition, so you would write those long, well thought out business plans and present them to panel. There's a big one at Rice University each year. And by 1999, there was the dot-com crash, and we were of course BioNB, and most of my experience is not in IT. I did work in a software startup, but dot-com stuff, the IT space really drove a lot of what we're going to talk about today, and has application across all business sectors. But what happened after the dot-com crash is the realization began to form that a lot of these companies that failed, and a good example is Webvan. I don't know if you remember Webvan, but it was an online grocery shopping service. And everybody thought this was a wonderful idea, so much that venture capitalists gave them $400 million. And they spent all that in a 2-year period. Spent $400 million in 2 years. And it was based on, and if you read the story, it's a really interesting story, it was based on a business plan that the word isn't made up, but it was based on assumptions that hadn't been tested with any market research or actually talking to customers. They just assumed that if they built a large warehouse and bought a lot of trucks and set up this infrastructure, that people would naturally go to the website and buy it, because the internet was really cool at that time. If you built a website, you expected people to come, and that wasn't the case, and that's what happened in '99. That all fell apart. And people started to think, what went wrong here? And VCs got to the point where they said, I don't want to read these big long documents anymore, they don't make any sense, I don't have the time for it. So we got the pitch deck. When PowerPoint became more popular and people started to write pitch decks, which were 15, 20 slide presentations that were used as pitching for venture capital, but some people started to use them as their actual business plan. In 2005, the Y Combinator Accelerator was formed. It was the first accelerator, and the idea there was to try and figure out what the best practices were for developing a business. And that didn't entail writing a business plan and then just getting money and launching and expecting everything to go well. It was going through a rigorous process of figuring out who the market was, really validating what you were trying to do. Lean Startup started in 2008 with Steve Blank and Eric Ries writing books. And the basic idea here was the realization made that you needed to move fast and iterate and use your resources wisely. The venture capitalists weren't going to give you $400 million to try out an idea. The VCs weren't giving money to people unless they had validated their idea. And we talked about the market validation in the webinar I did back in March. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. In 2010, the business model canvas came out, and a lot of you probably are familiar with it. And the idea with business model canvas was that the key thing when you were starting a new business in a new market was that you had to figure out the business model first. And the problem with the pre-dot-com era is people were using the General Motors approach. You were taking an established business and you were writing a 100-page document based on assumptions, market research, regression analysis, you name it, and saying, it'll just, my business will take off because I need to get 5% of a certain size market. The difference between an established business and a new business in a new field, a new product, and new ideas, you have no idea who your customer is and how you're going to make money. So the idea behind the business model canvas, and I'm going to talk about that in a little more detail in a moment, is trying to figure out what the business model for your business is. And that's an interesting change of thinking, because that's the core of what your business plan is for a new business. I always use the example of a shoe store. Everybody knows what the shoe store model is. Uh, it's a retail space. You rent space in a mall. People walk in, they take shoes off the rack, or they're taken into the back. They try them on, they buy them. 100 years ago, the model was not that. It was you would go to a cobbler and they would make the shoe for you. Just to always think of 100 years ago who the first guy was to say, I think we can sell shoes by retail, not bespoke shoes, just mass-produced shoes. So they might have trouble at the bank. So what they were trying to figure out was what that business model is. So it seems easy looking back right now what a business model for an established business is, but all businesses have to go through that process of determining how they actually make money. And nowadays we've got the startup weekends and the accelerators and incubators, and the idea behind that is to apply all this learning in the last 15 years of trying to do things quickly, trying to understand what a business model is, and trying to go out there and validate your market, figure out if you've got the right product for the right customer, and to use your resources wisely. And part of that is in the actual writing of a business plan. So this is an article I mentioned earlier. It's from the Wall Street Journal. It's old in a sense. It's from 2007. But it's interesting in that some academics, Babson College and Wilfrid Laurier University were two of the ones that cited in this article. We're doing an academic survey of business plans, see if there was a correlation between let's say the length of the business plan and the success of the business, and they found no correlation. So the conclusion here is that this time spent writing the business plan, the BFD, is better spent elsewhere. And then what I'm talking about here is that 50 to 100 page business plan, and they talk about a guy who he spent a year working on his business plan, spent an entire year. I think the going rate around here for if you want somebody to write you a business plan, I mean the written documents, $20,000 to $25,000. What you're going to learn today, you can do it on your own. You don't have to spend that money on a consultant. No offense to any consultants out there. I've done consulting on business plans, but there is a role for business plan. It's just the format that matters. So I don't agree that business plans should be ignored or they're dead. It's just what kind of business plan, because you have to plan, you have to do planning. I mean, if you're taking a vacation, you're going to do some planning about where you're going to go, what you're going to see, when you're going to go, and all that kind of stuff. So you got to do the same thing with a business. So the purpose of a business plan, people usually get hung up on the idea of it's raising funds, and yes, that's very important. And usually by the time you've gotten the funds, you don't worry about writing your business plan again because you've got the money, and once you start generating revenues, you don't worry about that. You start focusing on strategic plans, which is a little different animal. But for today especially, I want to talk about the concept of planning the business. And I know that sounds repetitive, but the idea is you're trying to organize your thinking around the business model, who the customers are, who the competition is, what your revenue model is. And this is important because I find that a lot of teams that I work with, even the people on the teams don't understand, even amongst themselves, they have a different impression of what the business is. So this gets your team all on one page. Of course, we mentioned raising funds. And the third people often forget about is you're attracting help. And what I mean by that is if you're trying to attract an employee, say you need to hire somebody to come join you and they're going to leave a more stable job to go work for a startup, you've got to be able to convince them. So there's other stakeholders out there. There's future employees. There's funding agents. There might be board members you want to attract, people on your advisory board. So having a clear business plan is really key to building up those resources. So I want to define lean. This comes out of lean manufacturing, which Toyota pioneered in the 60s, 70s. And it comes out of the work of Edward Demings, who wrote on this topic. And basically, make it simple, it's from manufacturing point of view, it's decreasing the use of resources. And in our case, it's time and money. and focusing on continuous improvement, so iterating. And that's what the foundation of the lean startup movement is, using your resources wisely and continuously improving. So it's a different approach than I'm going to build this. Somebody once said it's like writing the BFD business plan is like Moses coming down from the mountain with tablets. This is the way it's going to be. It doesn't happen in reality. So I want to distinguish between three types of plans, and today I'm going to give you a toolkit for doing the first two I'm going to talk about. And the first is the slide deck. I call the slide deck internal working document, and that's the first version you have. That's not the pretty version, although it can get prettier over time, and it helps you and your team organize your thinking and go through a process of learning and filling in the blanks. You start with a blank template, say 10 slides, and you just start putting down your guesses, your assumptions, and then as you go out and validate your business concept, you start to fill in that information. And then that document in turn will turn into your pitch deck. So the pitch deck is what you use to get funding, and as I said, to go and attract partners or employees or whoever you need to bring on board. And the pitch deck and the internal working document can often be one and the same. It's just a question of the prettiness, really, what it comes down to. And the third part is the written business plan, and I still believe there's a place for the written business plan, but it depends. I think that you know, depending on how much money you're going to raise, you may be required to have a longer business plan which is fleshed out, particularly surrounding financial statements. You want pro formas for your income statement, cash flow, balance sheet, financial assumptions. So that may not be necessary, and it may go away in the future, the written part. I think the spreadsheet section will always be required, but it's much smaller. And the idea here today is if you've got the internal slide deck built and you've built your pitch deck from that, the written business plan can be written really fast, because you've figured out the business model, you've got a rigorous business built, you've validated it. Now you just got to sit down, get some coffee or a glass of wine, and pound out that 30-page plan. And I've done that from a PowerPoint, and it's pretty simple to do it that way. What people tend to do is do it the opposite way. They write the big long business plan, they get all confused, and the pitch deck that comes out the other end is lousy. So it's better to do it the other way around. We're going to go through that process today. So I want to just talk briefly. I'm not going to get into detail on the business model canvas and the lean canvas. These are really valuable tools, and they're quite popular, especially around New Brunswick. They're new tools, they're proprietary, and that somebody developed them. And the idea behind them is that you're trying to figure out what the business model of your idea is. And they're really powerful tools, but what I find is that they take a little bit of hand-holding and training on how to use properly. I first used the business model canvas 4 years ago when I was doing business plan for a veterinary hospital, and I struggled. I hadn't read the book, and I was just told, fill this out, and I really struggled with it, and I needed help. And I mean, I had an MBA and a previous business degree, but it was just a different way of approaching it. So I think these are really, really valuable tool as part of an incubator accelerator program where somebody's explaining this, that you may have read the book that this is based on, and you can get some hand-holding over a period of time. So I think they're really valuable in a mentorship role. The difference between the lean canvas and the business model, the lean canvas came after. A guy named Ash Mora wrote it. He wanted to adapt the business model because he felt some of the sections weren't really relevant. And I prefer the lean canvas just because it's a little simpler to understand what they're asking for. In the U.S., particularly Silicon Valley, the slide deck is really popular. And that's I don't know if VCs are accepting business model canvases. They might be starting some of them. But the slide deck has a little bit more rigor around it. And I like the slide deck. I've been using it for about 10 years for anything. I just say, let's start with the slide deck. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So I'm going to go through a slide deck that I made. Then I'm going to give you that. I'm going to give you some resources so that you can go and you can start building your own if you want to. So the benefits of slide decks, everybody's got PowerPoint or Keynote, or I can't think of what the Google thing's called, but you've got access to it for free if you're using the Google. It's easy to use PowerPoint. I find it's the most intuitive of the Microsoft products. It's easy to change and iterate slide decks. We had some clients that had written a long document and they were complaining that it took so much work to update that Word file after they got feedback, and I told them to put together their 10-page slide deck, and they did that on a Sunday. And it really changed their thinking, and it made it a lot easier for them. It's easy to share PowerPoint through email. It's easy for somebody to read. VC is going to flip through a slide deck in 2 minutes. He's not going to get to that 50-page document. And your time is spent on analysis, not worrying about prose and grammar and formatting and all that wonderful stuff. And this, of course, once it's rigorous, you figured it out, will be the foundation of the business plan. And a note I wanted to make on the clients we had when we had them put the slide deck together, it was first draft, so put a first draft together, and we sat a bunch of us around a table, them and 3 or 4 of us, and over an hour-and-a-half period we went through, I think there were 12 slides, and we tore it apart, because it was very easy for us to understand all the elements of it. You're going to see that when I go through my example. It's really easy to tear apart. And I mean that in a good way, because it let them walk out of that room thinking, okay, we don't understand this, we got to go figure this out. So that slide deck really allows you to get a lot of really good feedback. It's easy for people to give feedback on. I'm a big believer in market validation, and what that means is you got to go out and talk to people, potential customers, to see if your idea is great. And remember I was saying that the assumption in the past was if you write that business plan and it's really long and it's really pretty and there's spreadsheets involved, your business will be successful. That's the fallacy of the BFD. What you're doing when you're starting out is you're starting out with some assumptions about who your customer is and what problem you're trying to solve. And what you need to do is just start simply by making some assumptions and guesses about that. And that's your first version of that slide deck, is you just write down what you think. And then you start going out and talking to people. And you do that as early as you can. So instead of perfecting that big business plan that you're really making up, you're starting with a skeleton framework of some guesses, and you're going to go out and you're going to try and fill in those blanks and prove yourself wrong or prove yourself right. So it's an iterative process, and that's what Lean is about, is that continuous improvement cycle, is that business plan reflects the realities of the market, not what you think. This picture here this is a stock photo I just got off Google, and what I'm trying to demonstrate here is this is often where people try and figure out their business plan. They do it in their office on the whiteboard, and I've been in rooms where people have debated who the customer is, and somebody, it wasn't me, but somebody piped up and said, well, have you talked to those people to see if they'd be actually interested in your product? So the saying is, there's only opinions inside the building and there's only facts outside the building. And the saying from Steve Blank, who's one of the lean startup gurus, is to get out of the building. So you have some assumptions, that's all they are. Then you got to go out and validate them. So you've got to get out there, start talking to people. So good business plans are based on facts about what a customer needs and if a market can support it, because that's really what it's about. A business is there to get and keep customers and make money. And bad business plans are based on what you want and think, and usually what the idea you start out with and the business you think is going to be result down the road is not what happens. It either doesn't happen or it's very different from what you think. So we're going to get into the practical part here. We're going to go through this sample slide deck that I've put together, and I based it on an outline. There's hundreds of different ways you can do this, and I've got some links at the end of the slide deck of some different models, formats, and some websites that'll give you some examples of design for slides that you can do, because you want to make this more graphic-y than texty. So I'll leave this slide here, but my deck here, I think I've got 12 or 13 slides, and there's typically this format. You can add more slides if you need them, particularly around the product. If you've got a biotechnology, often something very technical, you might need 2 or 3 slides. The caveat I'll say is you don't want to get into the weeds on the technology. Some slide decks may need more background on the financials. So it's iterative. It depends on the situation. It's up to you to decide. When I've been in classes where you have teams doing slide decks, it's really neat to see what people come up with, how they adapt their decks. So there's no standard format. A lot of business planning books say this is what you got to do, but you want to hit on some key elements. And this slide deck here that I've laid out will show you the key elements you need to do. And the thing I want to point out is you can have appendices at the end, as many as you want. You don't have to show somebody that, but what they say is use the appendices in the pitch so that if a VC asks you about a question, you can just pull that slide up and blow them away with the answer. So we're going to dive right into this pitch deck here. I put this together in about 4 hours, and I'm going to say I made up the business. And the point of the idea was to, I really want to explain it in simple terms, but it's actually a business. I think after I did the slide deck, I thought it's probably something we could do. Somebody out there might be interested in pursuing it. So the guidelines for deck, I'll go through that first. We want 10 or 15 slides. Some people will say no more than 10. I think it's kind of hard to do that. There are some examples that I'm going to give you at the end for Airbnb. I think they had 6 slides and they got millions of dollars to set up Airbnb, so it just depends. You just start writing the business plan I'm going to show you here. I just started writing really ugly in whatever the standard font in PowerPoint is, on ugly white PowerPoints, and then I made it pretty over time. Bullets are better than English. Use as little text as possible. Use useful graphics, and PowerPoint I find is fun to make graphics and pictures and that kind of stuff. I think it's a really neat program. Don't throw in the useless clip art, and as I said, you can tailor the parts and sequencing as you need. So this is my business. I call it Zip Bear. This is not a groundbreaking idea, but I wanted to explain this concept in as simple terms that everybody can understand an airline. If you recall, there was a flight direct from Fredericton to Boston. I don't know, I think it ended in 2009 or 10. Delta provided the service, and they actually contracted to another airline from the western U.S., and they went bankrupt, and we don't have the service anymore. So some of you may have flown it. I flew it. It's great. And I thought, geez, we need to have that service again. And apparently I read in the Gleaner that the seats, it was something like 60% of the seats were full on average. So it was there was real demand there for that. And that was 10 years ago. This slide deck I based on a deck that from Pitch Deck Coach, which is he's a guru on this stuff, and he was the model for this slide deck, and the model for a couple slide decks I've done with clients. And you can actually go and download a PowerPoint template that's really cool, and you can just start typing in your own information. So I tweaked it, but I based it on his, and like I said, all the format, there's various formats, but they're all fairly similar. So this is my title slide, and my business is an airline, a single plane airline flying from Fredericton to Boston. So I made a logo, and it's important to have a logo, and I just made it. I just made it in Paint, and I got that plane off Google Images. And I wanted to show what the plane looked like. pictures help, and I've got my contact information and confidential stamped on every slide. The first slide is the problem, and usually people jump right in, and I've read the business plans and watched pitches and people talking to investors and advisors. They jump right into the product, and to be honest with you, nobody cares about the product. They care about the problem, what you're trying to solve. So the problem is the issue, the pain for that person you're trying to solve, and in this case, it's business travelers who are feeling pain getting into the U.S. market. Now, if you've flown through Toronto, through Pearson, and you're trying to get to the U.S. for a business meeting, it's kind of a hassle. It's extra money. It's extra time. If you're trying to get to the West Coast, and in New Brunswick, we're trying to export. We've got tech companies. Our markets are in the U.S. Adding that extra day on and that cash, it's a pain. And Toronto is brutal. I know if you go through Toronto on a Monday morning, you're trying to get in the States and you're trying to clear through customs and you're trying to get through that security line that's nuts and everybody's panicking because they don't know if they're going to meet their cutoff. It's pretty stressful, and apparently people have been telling me that they'll shut Pearson down even if a couple snowflakes fly. So it's kind of a bottleneck to get through those connections. I'm not going to name names, but some people feel that the customer service on some of the airlines is not so great. And flying out of Toronto or whatever, you might not get the connections. I remember flying to Kentucky, and we had to go, I think we had to go through 3 or 4 airports to get there to Louisville, which is not it's a million, there's a million people in Louisville, so it's kind of a pain. And I've got a picture of a guy in the airport to demonstrate that pain. So the solution, so this is when I go in and I don't get into the brass tacks of the product. That'll come. So it's the key benefits, so not features. I'm focusing on the benefits here. So I've got my Zip Air Direct Daily Boston service. It's a 1-hour flight each morning going into Logan Airport, and then we come back in the evening. And my target market are business travelers. These are my benefits. I'm saving time, saving money, gets access to multiple connections, and this is going to be easy. There's only 19 seats on the plane, so the check-in is going to be easy. And the personal service, by that I mean that you'll be able to, they'll have the same pilot, flight crew on each flight, so people will get to know each other versus the other airlines would cycle flight crews through. So this slide's really about the benefits. And then I get into the product, and there's I got a picture of the aircraft. I've got a picture of the interior because people are going to ask. I anticipate they're going to ask, like, what's the leg room in there? And it's actually not bad. The Beechcraft, there's over 200 of these in service by regional airlines, and it's a pretty safe aircraft. And we fly direct down the coast. It's actually quite a nice flight on a sunny day, right down the coast of Maine. And the business model slide is a real important slide. And business model is just MBA speak for how the heck does this business work and how does it make money? And one of the easy ways to show this, especially for new businesses and in new markets, totally new ideas, is to draw a picture of how the money flows. And I did that for this airline, and I think we all know how an airline makes money generally. But in the case of Zip Air, we're totally selling our tickets over a website. We don't have a call center or anything like that because we're a small airline. But I want to highlight that we're not going to build an entire, we're not going to borrow $50 million to build this airline. We're going to outsource stuff, our maintenance contract and probably our baggage handling to WestJet, who's also at Fredericton Airport. We're going to lease our aircraft, and we're going to have a small flight crew. And the neat thing about the Beechcraft is that I think the co-pilot often doubles as they do the safety presentation. So you don't have somebody roaming the aisle during the flight. I think we will in our little business here, but it takes less people to operate the aircraft. So I've got a couple other examples of business models because this is really important. So it's just explaining how your business is working. And an example here is the Metro newspaper. If you've been to Toronto or London or New York, if you go on the subway, they give out these papers in the morning and everybody's reading them. I used to read them every morning when I was there. Basically, Metro in the middle here, they buy news from a news agency like AP or CP or whatever it's called. And they give them money, and Metro gives the consumer that free newspaper. I don't know if they pay the TTC fee, they probably do. And the large companies will pay Metro a fee to advertise. So that's simple. I mean, we all understand that. But for a new product, it's often people don't really understand how you're going to make money. And are you a subscription service? Are you licensing your technology? Are you going to sell it? Are you going to manufacture it? So, and I find in bioscience, we always run into that. Like, how are you going to make money? Maybe it's licensing. Are you going to do consulting? So clarifying that with pictures is really good. And one of the links I have at the end of the slide deck is to Board of Innovation. And you can download for free a 30-page document that shows business model pictures for 30 actual businesses. So you can get a sense of how to put these together. And it's really trial and error. You draw it on a piece of paper and try and figure it out. I really struggled with it when I started drawing business models. I found it really tough. One thing I wanted to mention is your business model is not your supply chain. Your supply chain is different. Supply chain is how you get your raw materials through to the consumer. So all those suppliers, that's the supply chain. And the value chain is different. That's an internal process or a system of internal processes to generate value, to generate profit margin. So if you get confused about the difference between those, they're used interchangeably, but just do a Google search on that, especially value chain. That's the stuff that Michael Porter wrote about how to generate competitive advantage by having, focusing on your HR and your internal processes and all that stuff. So that's a different stuff. The business model is about money. This is an example, and I drew this, and it's kind of complicated, but this is a biorefinery that takes corn and turns it into ethanol and sells it. And I won't get into detail here, but basically the money's made selling it to a distributor. And then there's also money to be made for selling residuals for fertilizer and animal feed and reusing it in the biorefining process. But this is just a really quick way of showing people how you're actually going to make money, who all the players are, where the money's changing hands, and it gives an idea of what kind of profitability will be involved here. So back to our deck, this is slide 5. This is the traction slide. And this slide is one that'll change maybe every day, because as you go out there, you'll have more evidence that people love what you're doing. And in my case, in my made-up business, we've talked to 142 customers. We did our market validation interviews. And we did an experiment. We did our minimum viable product. We rented a plane. One of our founders is a pilot, and we flew 6 people down to Boston, and we got a lot of great feedback. They loved the service, and we just trying to figure out the logistics of it. We do have a landing page website up, real simple, and we're collecting 500. We've collected 500 names through that website. And that's a way to validate that there's people interested in hearing about our service once it goes live. And we've been in the papers and things like that. So again, I want to highlight that this is totally made up business, but it's starting to sound real. This is the market slide, and there's many ways to do this, but I like the graphical. And the key thing here is that you got to have a breakdown. You got to have some sort of logic to how you arrived at these numbers. Do not ever say, go get a report from Forrester or Jupiter Research and say, you know, the market's 20 billion and we are going to get 1%. Well, why did you pick 1%? You'll kind of be laughed out of the room on that. So you want to do a build-up. You want to have some rationale behind that. And what I did here was I had no idea what the market from of business travelers leaving Fredericton Airport going to the U.S. And in about 15 minutes I just went Google crazy, and I was able to determine that the market's about 20 million and 40,000 people fly out of Fredericton every year into the U.S. And this is business travelers, just people going on business. And I got that information from the Fredericton Airport annual report, some statistics. There was an article in Fortune magazine on Southwest Airlines, and I was able to find a report on air travel statistics, transborder air travel statistics. So I was able to arrive at that, and I've got an appendix, which I'll show in a moment, of how I put that all together. And I was able to estimate my market share based on a calculation where I did the load factor. So I'm an estimation, I'm going to show you this in a moment, of how many seats would actually be full, multiplied by the total seats per flight by the total flights per year. And that gave me the total number of passengers for the first 3 years. All I care about is the first 3 years. And it gave me a share of that market. And they're always going to grow. Really the important thing here is the assumptions behind what you're doing, because you're probably not right. How can you predict the future? So you really want to just show that you've put some thought into this. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Competition slide. This is the standard two-dimensional matrix where you map your competitors. And really what you're trying to do is show why you're better. You always have competitors no matter what you're doing. If you're the newest, greatest thing in the world, you still have substitutes. People have the option to do nothing. So you're always going to have some sort of competition. In my case, I've got convenience as a factor. So that's the quality dimension. Less convenient, more expensive, less expensive. And Zip Air is more convenient. And it's kind of in the middle of the price range. And Air Canada and WestJet are less convenient, more expensive. And my substitutes are driving to Bangor and flying out of there, going down Interstate 95, which are all options. But my target market, they're worried about convenience. So, you know, I'm not going to capture everyone that's wanting to go into the U.S. The growth strategy slide talks about how we're going to scale our business, so how we're going to grow it. That starts with acquiring customers here in the green box, so our standard marketing campaign. How we're going to keep customers, so our customer service dimension. We've got loyalty program and great customer service, personal touch. Then product development is how we're going to grow the business and stay competitive, because if we're successful, we're probably going to get people coming in to join us. And for example, we might do an iPhone app and expand to do flights out of St. John to Boston. So this is really important, and venture capitalists are really interested in how you're going to grow that business, how big it's going to get, because they don't really want to put money into businesses that aren't going to have a high return, because they seek high return to make up for all the bad investments they do. Financial slide. This is as complicated as it should get in a pitch deck, and maybe even as complicated as it should get in early stages of business planning. I focus on 3 years. And the most important part of this slide is not the green gross revenues, but it's the gray part up here. And the rationale that I used, I've got 19 seats on my plane, and I'm going to fly 3 times a week. I'm going to be conservative. That's going to give me an annual return flight of 156. My load factor I'm estimating, that's the number of people that are actually going to buy seats on that plane. 50% of those seats are going to be taken in the first year. It's going to go to 60, then to 75. And I multiply all that together by my average return ticket, and I get my gross revenue projection. And then I do, which is easy to do, my estimates of expenses. And then I get to my EBITDA, and EBITDA is just a fancy term, but it's pretty simple. It's just your earnings before worrying about interest and taxes and depreciation and amortization. Don't worry about interest because you don't know what how much equity you'll have or how much debt you'll have, so just ignore it. And taxes, leave that to the accountants. And calculating depreciation and amortization, you can leave to another day. So you don't have to worry about getting right down to the net income level. In my case, I'm profitable. I'm 10% profit margin in year 3, so that's not bad. But again, as I mentioned, the idea here is to make sure that your assumptions are sound and that there's some logic behind how you arrived at that green bar. This slide here shows what you've done to prove that you're actually doing things, that you're actually working actively in the business and putting in effort. This is important. This is all made up, but you want to put down a list of all the things you're working on and the accomplishments that you've achieved. The team slide, this is what often people consider to be the most important part of the business. You want to list out your key members of the team and your advisory board, and the green names is my team, and you can see, and these are all made up people except for me. They're just pictures I got off the internet, but I'm trying to demonstrate here the idea that I've got an experienced team behind me. Jed is my co-founder. He is a pilot, and he has connections with John, who's operations manager at Westside. So he's our connection to WestJet and getting us that maintenance, helping us with that maintenance contract. And the other advisory board members are just our accountants, our lawyer that we pay, but I'm showing that we've got a really strong team behind us. So I've seen these slides or in the business plan, people don't talk about in detail the experience. Really, the experience is important. And then you want to put together that advisory board of people that know the industry you're in. The funding slide is your ask, and you ask what you want and what you're going to do with that money. And don't worry about getting an exit, because that's premature. People ask, oh, should I put the exit, what I want to do? Who knows? Nobody knows. Don't talk about that yet. Worry about that later. They really want to know what you're going to do with their money. And they want to see some skin in the game, so we've put in $500,000. And our last slide is the summary, and this is the slide you leave up if you're doing a pitch so that people can refer to it, and you just list out all the key strong points of why somebody should give you money and why this is such an awesome business that's going to make money. And you put your contact information up there on that slide so they can access that. They can write that down if they have to. So that's a pitch deck. I'm just going to show you a couple other slides and we'll be done for questions. This is an appendix that I can refer to if somebody says, how did you drive at those pretty circles that you drew on slide 9? And this is my breakdown, and I won't go through it now, but you can look at it when I send you the slide deck. That's my rationale and all my references that I made that revenue model. And again, I probably built this whole thing in about 30 minutes. And it could use some tweaking, and as I get feedback from people, have a better, maybe it could make my model a little tighter. This is another way to lay out competition. I like doing it this way. It just depends on the business, but you've got the competitors at the top and you've got the dimensions you compete on against on the left side, and I've got all nice checks and nobody else has all checks, and most people have all X's, so I'm the best. So it's a really clear way to show how you differ with your competition, how you have an advantage over them. Timelines aside, I didn't put in there, but sometimes I'll put this in, and it's just showing what the next steps are going to be, especially if it's confusing. Say you're building a plant or something like that, and you've got a lot of steps, or there's regulatory issues you've got to go through. There's critical path issues. Throw in this timeline slide, make it simple so that everybody knows, okay, that's what you're going to do next with the money I'm going to give you. Tips, don't over-describe the technology. Keep it simple. This is especially key in the bioscience space. Make it stand on its own if you're emailing. If you're emailing it out to somebody, make sure there's at least some text on there that's going to explain some sort of concept. If you're talking to somebody, it's easier to explain, but make sure they can understand it if they're reading it. Convert it to PDF if emailing. Just in case they don't have PowerPoint, they have an older version or the fonts aren't on their computer and it all gets screwy. They might not read it if that's the case. Make sure you got your contact info and confidential. And a key point, especially for our clients, is if you've got IP that you've got to protect by patent or whatever, you've got to make sure you get that organized before you go out and start sending around your business plan for feedback or going and doing pitching. It's okay to do it internally, and I would advise you to start doing that internal slide deck with your team, but if you do public disclosure, like start handing it out to people, that could prevent you from getting a patent. So you've got to talk to your agent or your patent attorney, or we have connections to people if you're in our space that can help you on this. Final point, when you may need that, what I call the short formal document, that 20 or 30 page, basically the more money you need, or depends on who, if the venture capital firm wants it, they're doing their due diligence, or a government agency, they may want that, but like I said, that's down the road. Don't start that at the beginning. Write that later if you have to, and it'll be much easier. This is the reading list, so you'll have this in your email and you'll be able to follow the links. They're all great tools. The cool one is the best pitch decks of all time, and the Airbnb one is really neat. It's, like I said, 6 slides, and they got millions of dollars, and Airbnb is quite popular now. So I will open up the floor to questions, and Jenny's going to manage them, so please go ahead.
Thanks, Ryan. The first question is, in my business plan deck, should I talk about my challenges or my unknowns?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I don't think you want to worry about that if you're doing a pitch to investors. Let them figure that out. But I think it's really good in that internal working document to throw in a slide. Like, here's the challenges we're facing. Here's some issues we've got to deal with. Remember, it's that internal document, and I often do that. I'll always have stuff where I list out, here's all the things we need to figure out, or I write question mark, is this true, and things like that. So I think that's really important when you're working inside, but when you're presenting to the investor, you want to be confident. You've got a solid plan, you've researched it, you've validated it, they've got a great team, but be prepared for those kind of questions.
Great. Another question comes up, asks, should I share my entire business plan with my whole team and all of my employees and partners?
Yeah, and what I mean by team is your kind of your founding team. So it's you and your CEO and your founding team. So just a small group. Now the question is, if you share your business plan to all your staff, I think that's a great idea. It's not necessarily all your financials. The animal hospital that my wife and I own, I show the staff our annual business plan every year, our strategic plan. They really value it. We only show them the revenue forecast. I don't get into profits or anything like that, but they love it. So I think it's valuable, but it's just a question of what you show. But what I'm talking about in this presentation is the 2 or 3 of you guys getting your business off the ground. You should all be involved in writing that slide deck.
Do you have any tips on whether or not like animations are a good idea in PowerPoint presentations?
I don't. If you mean video, I've seen people do the presentation videos and presentations, which are a great tool. The only issue you might have is technology. It might not work. Sometimes if you don't do it on a Mac, like if you don't do the link properly, it won't turn on, and it might make the file size bigger. If you're talking about the GIFs, I would stay away from those, things like that. Just keep it simple, keep it light. The video you could always show separate to it. Just have the AVI file or the MP4 or whatever on show it on VLC or QuickTime or whatever. But I would focus on keeping your slide deck text and, whatever two-dimensional graphics.
If you're still in the very early stages and sort of still validating your market and all you have is a slide deck, if someone asks for a hard copy version, do you suggest you just print off your slides, or should you present it in sort of a different format but with the same sort of information?
Well, that's a tough question. I mean, I think it depends on what your stage you're at. Like when I was writing the presentation that I showed you guys, it was pretty ugly for the first hour, and then I started making it prettier. It's not so much about, the graphics and things like that. It's the holes in it. When we're working with clients, we'll tell them you're not ready to pitch yet. You haven't found out enough information. So it's not so much about the business plan. The business plan is just a framework. It's like the business model canvas. The slide deck is a placeholder for information that you're trying to validate. So if you're talking to somebody and potential investor or thing like that, so I guess it's okay to say we've still got some gaps. The business plan, one of the ones I'm working on with one of our clients, there's a fair bit of holes in it. They have a slide deck that's pretty good looking. It's got all the pieces, but there's still elements they're still trying to figure out. So they're working on doing that. So I think it depends on who you're talking to, and we can't discuss every hypothetical in this format, but I think sharing and getting feedback is better than keeping it close to you, and I'm talking about your business model. The one thing I do want to say is that if you're going out and doing your customer validation interviews, you don't show them your PowerPoint slide deck. And the reason for that is you're trying to uncover organically the problem solution that they have. If you show them what you think it is at the start, then you've kind of poisoned the well. And we talk about that in the market validation seminar, or a web seminar that I'd done. It's up on the website.
Of all of the main sections that you outlined in your business plan deck, which of those do you find new startups forget about the most?
I don't know if they forget so much. I mean, you could always leave out, for example, accomplishments. I think that sometimes the slides are done poorly, or it's the order. For example, the financials are done poorly. They might paste in an entire spreadsheet, or they don't have that rationale. I'm showing you that gray box up at the top, and I'll pull it up here. That's really the important part. The other thing, and I had mentioned this, was jumping right into the product. So their first slide is talking about the features of this widget, and there's no context to it. And that's what the problem solution slides are. So I think it's really important that you start with problem solution, and that's standard format for all these different formats for the slide deck. And the two that are really good are the Sequoia Capital business plan. They're a big venture capital firm, and I think they're kind of behind the problem solution setup. And Guy Kawasaki, you may have heard of, he's big into this slide deck as a business plan.
How can you specifically and BioNB help new companies sort of start and iterate their business plan deck?
Yeah, so we love, and I love this stuff. I'm kind of a business plan dork, but what I'm going to send out is a template for the one I did, and you can use that to start. And all these sources on the reading list that I've got up here. You as the owner, founder, you need to write your business plan. It's your job. You need to be close to it. You need to go talk to customers. You cannot outsource that. But we're a great sounding board for tearing your business plan apart. And I mean that in a good way, because we really want to help and make sure that you're covering all the bases. And you know, we're opinions, and we have connections to other people that can mentor you and advise you in our particular space. And I was telling you the example about the business plan, the two guys that they worked on. They did a fantastic job, and we sat down and we went through it, a bunch of us in a room over an hour and a half period, and we really dug into that business plan. And it was easy because it was just going through a slide deck, and we were really, I think, able to help them push that business forward. And then they went off with their instructions to gather more information, talk to more customers, and keep tweaking that business plan. And in their case, they were trying to figure out who the customer is. So their initial slide had, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 different customers, and we're trying to get them to zero in on that customer that really will purchase what they've got. And they're working on trying to figure that out. And I can see them when they go to do a pitch at some point, that slide will be really simple. It'll be one target customer, at least to start with. So yeah, if anybody, we're going to send this out, and I wasn't joking, if people start working on their business plans and put them together in the deck, and you can just type over what I wrote for my Zip Air, send it to me, and we'll take a look at it. And everything, you know, it's all confidential. Everything we handle is confidential, and I'd be happy to provide feedback.